The aircraft is already descending when the story begins. Outside the cockpit windows, northern Queensland is almost entirely black. The sea absorbs what little starlight exists. The coastline is a faint suggestion rather than a line, an absence interrupted only by scattered points of yellow, the lights of Mackay far ahead. Trans-Australia Airlines Flight 538 is on approach. Inside the cockpit, there is no urgency. The engines maintain a steady tone, their vibration familiar, unremarkable. Instruments glow softly in the darkness. Altimeters, airspeed indicators, vertical speed. Each needle moves within expected ranges. Everything appears routine. This is how accidents often begin. The flight has followed its planned route without incident. Weather along the coast has been variable but manageable. The aircraft is serviceable. The crew is experienced. There are no warning lights, no system failures, no sudden deviations. The danger here is not dramatic. It is subtle. As the aircraft descends, the crew transitions from instrument references to visual cues. This is standard practice. At night, in clear or marginal conditions, pilots rely on runway lighting, horizon references, and the spatial relationships they have learned through repetition. But on this night, those cues are incomplete. The approach path to Mackay in 1960 offers limited visual guidance. The runway is visible, but the surrounding terrain provides little depth perception. Over water, darkness erases texture. There is no modern glide slope indicator to confirm the aircraft's descent angle. The crew must judge height and distance largely by experience. The descent continues. From the cockpit, the runway appears stable in the windscreen. It does not rise or fall dramatically. This can be deceptive when visual references remain fixed. The human brain interprets the approach as safe, even when altitude is bleeding away more rapidly than intended. The aircraft passes through 1,000 feet. There is no alarm to mark the moment, no automated call-out, only instruments, skinned rhythmically, and outside darkness that gives nothing back. Passengers in the cabin are unaware of any change. The sound of the engines remains constant. There is no sudden pitch, no abrupt maneuver. The flight feels like any other arrival at the end of a long day. Below the aircraft, the ground is closer than it appears. The final approach is quiet, professional, ordinary, and that is what makes it dangerous. In the seconds ahead, there will be no mechanical failure to blame, no single catastrophic error. What unfolds will be the result of small, reasonable decisions made in limited conditions. Decisions shaped by the era, the environment, and the absence of safeguards that have not yet been invented. Flight 538 continues its descent toward Mackay, guided by judgment, habit, and incomplete information. The margin for error is already gone. In 1960, commercial aviation in Australia occupies a transitional space between eras. The rapid expansion of air travel after the Second World War has turned flying from a novelty into a routine service. Airlines operate on tight schedules. Aircraft depart and arrive with mechanical reliability that would have been unthinkable a generation earlier. For most passengers, flight is no longer an adventure. It is transportation. Trans-Australia Airlines, commonly known as TAA, is central to that transformation. Formed as a government-owned carrier, TAA has built its reputation on discipline and consistency. Its crews are trained to standardized procedures. Its fleet is maintained to rigorous specifications. By 1960, the airline is considered dependable, professional, and conservative in its operations. Flight 538 fits comfortably within that framework. The route links Brisbane to Mackay, part of a broader network connecting coastal Queensland. These are not long-haul flights. They are short, familiar sectors flown multiple times each week. Crews know the airfields. They know the weather patterns. They know the expectations. Mackay itself is a regional airport serving the growing industrial and agricultural area. In 1960, its facilities are functional rather than elaborate. The runway is adequate in length. Lighting is present but limited. Navigation aids reflect the standards of the time, not the redundancies of later decades. Approaches into Mackay at night rely heavily on pilot judgment. There is no precision approach radar, no electronic glide slope guidance. Visual descent is guided by runway edge lights and the pilot's interpretation of aircraft attitude and rate of descent. Over land, terrain features can provide cues. Over water, those cues vanish. The final segment of Flight 538 is scheduled for the evening hours. Night operations are routine for TAA, but they carry inherent risk. Human vision is less reliable in darkness. Depth perception degrades. Contrast disappears. These risks understood, but not fully mitigated. In 1960, the concept of controlled flight into terrain is not yet formalized as a distinct accident category. Safety analysis tend to focus on mechanical reliability and pilot skill. If an aircraft is functioning and the crew is qualified, the assumption is that risk is low. What is less recognized is how easily the human sensory system can be misled in specific environments. Flight 538 departs as planned. There are no reports of significant en route difficulties. The aircraft performs normally. Communication with air traffic services follows standard procedures. Nothing about the flight distinguishes it from dozens of others operating along the Queensland coast that week. Passengers board expecting a routine arrival. Crew members conduct the flight, as they have many times before. The conditions that will shape the outcome are not sudden. They are structural. They exist in the way night approaches are designed, in the limits of ground infrastructure, and in the quiet assumption that experience alone is sufficient protection. As Flight 538 descends toward Mackay, it carries with it the accumulated practices of its time, practices that work until they don't. The aircraft assigned to Flight 538 is representative of its era, robust, mechanically straightforward, and designed for short to medium-range domestic operations. It is built to withstand repeated cycles of takeoff and landing, to operate reliably from regional airfields, and to be maintained with the tools and knowledge available at the time. By 1960 standards, it is a mature design. Its cockpit is dominated by analog instrumentation. Flight information is conveyed through needles and dials rather than digital readouts. There is no automated warning system to alert the crew to proximity with terrain. Altitude awareness depends entirely on disciplined instrument scanning and the pilot's interpretation of the outside world. The aircraft does exactly what is told. Power settings translate directly into descent rates. Control inputs produce predictable responses. There is no malfunction recorded in the engines, flight controls, or navigation equipment. The machine performs within its certified envelope until the end. The crew is experienced and qualified. Both pilots are familiar with night operations and with the route into Mackay. Their training emphasizes procedural compliance, smooth handling, and situational awareness. There is no evidence of fatigue, impairment, or distraction. This is not a crew operating beyond its limits. But aviation safety is rarely determined by competence alone. Night approaches place unique demands on perception. Over water, especially, visual references can collapse into a two-dimensional scene. The horizon may be indistinct. The aircraft's landing lights illuminate nothing until moments before touchdown. Without terrain texture, depth becomes difficult to judge. This environment creates a known illusion, the tendency to fly a lower than intended approach. In the absence of a visual glide slope indicator, pilots rely on the apparent position of the runway in the windscreen. If the runway appears stable, the approach feels correct, but stability can mask gradual altitude loss. At Mackay in 1960, Approach lighting provides limited guidance. Runway edge lights define the landing surface, but do little to convey vertical profile. There are no visual slope indicators to confirm whether the aircraft is above or below the desired descent path. The system assumes the pilot will compensate. Weather conditions on the night of the accident are not severe, but they are not ideal. Visibility is reduced. Cloud layers obscure celestial references. Ambient light is minimal. These are not conditions that demand instrument-only flight, but they erode visual reliability. The aircraft instruments offer accurate information. The altimeter shows height above sea level. The vertical speed indicator reflects the rate of descent, but interpreting these readings requires context. Without a stabilized approach concept as it is defined today, descent rates vary more freely. Slight deviations are not immediately flagged. There is no standardized call-out to force correction. The environment, the systems, and the procedures are aligned toward flexibility. That flexibility becomes vulnerability. As Flight 538 continues its approach, every element, aircraft performance, crew experience, environmental conditions, and infrastructure limitations, functions as designed. There is no single failure to isolate. Instead, the margin between safe flight and disaster narrows quietly, invisibly. The final minutes of Flight 538 unfold without alarm. The aircraft is aligned with the runway. Power is reduced gradually. The descent is controlled. From the cockpit, nothing suggests urgency. The approach appears stable. The runway lights fix in the windscreen, neither rising nor falling in a way that would demand immediate correction. This is the illusion. As the aircraft passes below a safe approach altitude, the instruments provide the information, but not the warning. There is no automated call-out, no ground proximity alert, only needles, numbers, and the expectation that experience will bridge the gap between indication and interpretation. The crew continues visually. Over the dark water short of the runway, depth perception collapses. The absence of terrain removes the brain's ability to judge height accurately. The aircraft is lower than the crew believes. The descent rate, though not extreme, is sufficient to carry the aircraft below the intended glide path. The runway remains visible. This reinforces the sense that the approach is correct. In the final moments, the aircraft descends through a critical altitude. At this height, there is little time to recognize the error and recover. Any correction would require immediate power increase and pitch adjustment. Actions that demand recognition first. Recognition does not come in time. The aircraft strikes the ground short of the runway. The impact is abrupt and decisive. There is no prolonged sequence, no chance for recovery. The aircraft, still under control, collides with terrain at low altitude while aligned for landing. It is the definition of control flight into terrain. For those on board, the transition from routine flight to catastrophe is instantaneous. There is no warning, no anticipation of danger. The professionalism of the approach offers no protection in its final seconds. Silence follows. Flight 538 does not reach the runway. The response begins in darkness. Emergency services reach the crash site shortly after impact. The location, short of the runway, beyond the airport perimeter, confirms what many already suspect. The aircraft did not overshoot. It did not veer off course. It arrived where it should not have been, at an altitude it should not have reached. There are no survivors. The wreckage distribution is compact. This immediately shapes the investigation. A confined debris field suggests controlled flight at the moment of impact rather than an in-flight breakup or loss of control. Engines show evidence of power. Control surfaces are accounted for. There is no indication of a pre-impact fire or structural failure. The aircraft was intact. Investigators begin with the fundamentals: airframe, engines, instruments. Maintenance records are reviewed. Component histories are traced. Nothing emerges to suggest mechanical malfunction. Systems that could have influenced descent, altimetry, power plants, flight controls, are examined carefully. They are found to be functioning. Attention turns to the approach. Flight data recording, as understood in later decades, does not exist in 1960. Reconstruction relies on physical evidence, procedural knowledge, air traffic records, and the known geometry of the approach path. Investigators map the aircraft's likely descent profile based on impact location and runway alignment. The conclusion becomes increasingly clear. The aircraft descended below a safe approach altitude while on a normal landing configuration. The crew believed they were higher than they were. Visual references were misleading. Instrument indications were available but not sufficient on their own to trigger correction. This is not framed as recklessness. The investigation recognizes the operational context of the time. Night visual approaches without vertical guidance are standard practice. The absence of visual glide slope indicators is not unusual for a regional airport. Crews are expected to manage these approaches through judgment and experience. What the accident exposes is not a violation of procedure, but a limitation of procedure. The findings emphasize the danger of night approaches over water, where visual illusions are strongest. Investigators note that even experienced crews can be misled when environmental cues are degraded and technical safeguards are absent. There is no single corrective action, no part to replace, no individual to fault. Instead, the accident is absorbed into a growing body of evidence, one that suggests controlled flight into terrain is not an aberration, but a recurring pattern. Within the aviation community, the implications are unsettling. If professionalism and serviceable aircraft are not enough, then safety must be addressed structurally. Flight 538 becomes a reference point. Quietly, without public drama, it contributes to a shift in thinking that prevention must compensate for human limitation, not rely on its perfection. The legacy of Flight 538 is not immediate. There is no single reform announced in its aftermath, no dramatic overhaul traced directly to its name. Instead, the accident settles into the quiet accumulation of evidence. One more data point in a pattern aviation has not yet fully named. But patterns, once recognized, change everything. Throughout the 1960s and into the decades that follow, controlled flight into terrain emerges as a dominant cause of fatal accidents worldwide. Investigators begin to understand that modern aircraft, increasingly reliable mechanically, are now limited more by human perception than by engineering. Night approaches, featureless terrain, visual illusions. Flight 538 fits that profile with precision. Gradually, the industry responds. Visual approach slope indicators are introduced and standardized. Runway lighting systems are improved to convey not just lateral alignment, but vertical guidance. Approach procedures become more structured, with stabilized ascent concepts replacing flexible judgment in the final phases of flight. Technology follows. Ground proximity warning systems are developed to provide what human senses cannot: an unambiguous alert when an aircraft is too low, too soon. Later still, terrain awareness systems expand that capability, mapping the world beneath the aircraft in real time. These systems exist because experience alone proved insufficient. Training evolves as well. Pilots are taught explicitly about visual illusions, about the danger of black hole approaches over water or unlit terrain. Instrument cross-checking during visual approaches becomes non-negotiable. Altitude awareness is reinforced as a primary defense, not a secondary reference. None of these changes can be attributed to a single accident, but each accident contributes. Flight 538 becomes part of the foundation on which modern approach safety is built. Its lessons are embedded in procedures, equipment, and training manuals read by pilots who will never know its flight number. This is how aviation advances. not through spectacle, but through accumulation, through the recognition that safety is not the absence of failure, but the presence of defenses. Today, aircraft approach Mackay, and countless airports like it, guided by systems that remove ambiguity from descent. The margin that vanished in 1960 has been restored, layer by layer. The passengers and crew of Flight 538 are remembered not through headlines, but through outcomes. Because of what was learned, others arrived safely. And in aviation, that is a quiet measure of legacy.